Hi, and welcome to A Critical Dragon, where I talk to you about narrative in film, television, and books. And this video is about character motivation and how character motivation and plot can conflict with one another or can support one another to develop a more interesting and cohesive narrative. So, the easiest way to illustrate this is to take a look at a narrative that people are familiar with, but we have multiple versions of. So, The Lord of the Rings, in particular, The Fellowship of the Ring, is a perfect example of this. Um, in Tolkien's Fellowship of the Ring, following the encounter on Weathertop between Aragorn, Samwise Gamgee, Meriadoc Brandybuck, Peregrine Took, and Frodo Baggins, they are confronted by the Nazgul. Frodo gets injured with a mortal knife. He's poisoned. He's wounded. And so Aragorn and the hobbits have to try to get to Rivendell as quickly as possible in order to get Frodo healed by Elrond. So far, so good. In Tolkien's version, while they're on the road to Rivendell, Aragorn tries to find some healing herbs, which is obviously an important plot point for later on in Return of the King. But as he's doing that, along the road comes Glorfindel, the Elven Prince, or Elven Lord. Glorfindel then puts Frodo onto his horse, and Frodo rides off towards Rivendell, and he's pursued by the Ringwraiths. Frodo eludes them, crosses the ford, turns the horse around, and he faces off against the assembled Ringwraiths. And at this point, the Nazgul try to tempt him. They try to lure him to join them. The ring itself is calling to Frodo to try to tempt him to put the ring on. Despite this, despite the Nazgul tempting him, despite the ring tempting him, despite the fact that he is severely wounded, that is being poisoned by this knife, that he's being weakened, Frodo finds the strength of character and the resolve to refuse the temptation and denies the Ringwraiths. And this is a hugely important moment for him. They then essentially cast a spell, or Frodo succumbs to this. He falls down, but Elrond releases the waters of the river. Gandalf adds a little bit of frippery to the top of them in the form of horses in the waves, and the Nazgul are swept away. So far, so good. This is important because once Frodo is healed, they have the Council of Elrond, and at the Council of Elrond, it is decided that Frodo can carry the ring on the quest. And you have to imagine that one of the major reasons for this is because when tempted by the ring, when tempted by the Nazgul, when it mattered the most, Frodo had the strength and the courage and the resolve to deny them. And that one factor, his strength of character, is enough for them to trust this unknown person who is a halfling, a hobbit, who is not physically powerful, is not wise, is not famous, is not a warrior or an archer or a ranger or a mage. He's none of these things. He's the everyman. But the everyman has that strength of character to refuse evil when it counts. And that's why they let him go on the quest. That's why he becomes the ring bearer. Now, if we look at the animated version of this, we have the sequence play out almost exactly the same way, except instead of Glorfindel, it's Legolas. Legolas comes along the road on his horse to find them, and this makes absolute sense from a storytelling point of view because Glorfindel is absent from the narrative from that point on. He's not important to the narrative from that point on. Whereas Legolas becomes this character who becomes part of the quest. So by introducing him here, you're removing one more character that you don't necessarily need for that version of the story. So you're streamlining it slightly. You're introducing one of the main characters earlier, and you're establishing a relationship between himself and Aragorn, which obviously is slightly different than in the book, but it works here and it builds on that. And this is, as an animated film, obviously a lot shorter, and it had to excise some material. So this streamlines it. But again, the sequence plays out the same way. Frodo rides off on Legolas's horse, crosses the river, refuses the Nazgul, and then the river washes them away. So far, so good. Then we get to Peter Jackson's live action version of exactly the same event. Now, in this case, it's not Glorfindel, it's not Legolas. This time it's Arwen. And again, it makes no major difference whether it's Legolas, Glorfindel, or Arwen. This doesn't actually change anything. It's essentially an elf with a relationship with Aragorn. It doesn't matter what that relationship is. The big difference here is instead of Arwen remaining with Aragorn and the other hobbits to protect them, and Frodo riding off on the horse on his own, Frodo is essentially just dumped over Arwen's horse. And she rides off and he bounces around a bit like a sack of potatoes. And Arwen crosses the ford. And while Frodo is looking sickly and weak and horrible, and the Nazgul are trying to tempt him, Arwen says, if you want him, come and claim him. She refuses the Nazgul. The waters rise up, wash them away. Whether it's Arwen or Elrond, it makes no major difference. The big change that happened here is not that Arwen replaced Glorfindel. It's not that Arwen replaced Legolas. It's that Frodo's agency in this moment has been completely removed. Because now place yourself in the role of one of the advisors in the Council of Elrond, where Aragorn has reported what has happened so far. That in Bree, Frodo stuck the ring on his finger, caused a scene, and nearly everyone died, and Aragorn had to rescue them. That when they were confronted by the Nazgul and Weathertop, Frodo stuck the ring on his finger and nearly died when the Nazgul stabbed him. And now, when they're being pursued by the Nazgul, Arwen had to step in and rescue him. Why would you, sitting in the Council of Elrond, agree to send this idiot who has messed up every step of the way? Why would you send Frodo on the quest? Why would you trust him on the quest? You wouldn't. He has demonstrated no reason why he is trustworthy, apart from Gandalf sort of going, oh, go on, he's a good lad. That's it. But the way that Tolkien wrote it, you can completely understand why Frodo is trusted to go on the quest. So it's fascinating how a small change, a simple change, that including Arwen in the story, letting her be or giving her a more active role, getting her involved so that she wasn't just a love interest for Aragorn that's referred to and, married off at the end. Giving her something more to do, absolutely fine. A way of, to my mind at least, fixing this would have been if Arwen had arrived, they put Frodo on the horse, he rode off exactly as Tolkien wrote it, and then Arwen and Aragorn held off two of the Nazgul or one of the Nazgul, or if she'd called down the power of elven light or something to distract the Nazgul to let Frodo get away. That way she could have been more important to the story. She could have had a more active role. It wouldn't have fundamentally changed the narrative. Frodo could still have had his scene where he demonstrated why he is trusted to go on the quest. So that's a little bit about how character motivation and plot and the narrative sequencing and how it is all interwoven to give you a cohesive narrative. And when you change things or when things don't fit right, sometimes there are repercussions or unexpected consequences of that change that you didn't foresee. In this case, no one in their right mind would let Frodo go on the quest. So that takes me to Iron Man. And in Iron Man, there's a very interesting issue with Obadiah Stane. There's a complete narrative arc for Iron Man and the evolution of Tony as a character across all three films, which I'll probably do a different video about if anyone is interested. Well, even if you're not, I'm interested. But Obadiah Stane is the character that I want to talk about here because in the cinematic release, and I have no idea if there were additional scenes filmed or if there were scenes from the screenplay that never quite made it, that were left on the cutting room floor or were included as DVD extras. But in the cinematic release, there is no reason given for why Obadiah Stane wants to get rid of Tony. None. Uh, There's no reason for it. In the chronological sequencing, if you take the flashback sequence and put it in front of the very first scene where Tony's in the Humvee and you play it out in chronological order, Obadiah Stane has contacted uh, these terrorists in Afghanistan to whom he is selling weapons illegally and said to them, there's going to be a military convoy. I want you to attack the convoy and kidnap the person in it. Then Tony goes, gives a demonstration, gets in the Humvee, goes along, gets kidnapped by the terrorists. The terrorists realize it's him. They send a video message to Obadiah Stane saying, "You never told us it was Tony Stark. We basically want more money." Um, then Tony makes his Iron Man Mark 1, breaks out, and escapes. He then goes back to America, decides he doesn't want Stark Industries to make weapons anymore. Um, Obadiah Stane figures out about the arc reactor and goes, "Oh, this is brilliant. This is another thing that we can use." Um, Obadiah then tries to kill Tony again, and Pepper finds out that Obadiah is a traitor. And then there's the big confrontation because Obadiah now has his big suit that he's going to wear. They have a big robot fight, which is highly thrilling. Um, and Tony beats Obadiah. The end. In that sequencing, when you put it in chronological order, Tony finding out about them selling arms under the table or selling arms illegally comes long after Obadiah ever did this. That is not a motivation. Tony finding out is not a motivation to kill Tony because Tony finds out long after Obadiah tried to kill him. Obadiah then takes a direct hand in trying to kill Tony uh, when Tony finds out because he now feels he's down to his last cards. But that's not the initial motivation that Obadiah had. You're never given the initial motivation. There is some implication that when Tony took over the company, Obadiah became less important. We see that magazine cover where Tony's the new kid on the block and Obadiah is in the background and he's being overshadowed by Tony's genius. Okay, that might eat at his ego. But the film is also at pains to point out that Tony doesn't really get himself involved in the running of the office. He's not in the office all the time. Obadiah is actually the guy that runs the corporation. He's the one in charge of the board. He's the one doing all of this. And Tony sits at home and plays with his toys and invents things. Obadiah is the international businessman. Tony's just the man child inventing things that Obadiah then markets and sells. So there's no reason for Obadiah to have Tony killed. He refers to Tony as the golden goose, the thing that is producing so much wealth for him. Every new invention is the thing that's making him money. So why does Obadiah want to kill Tony? And this ate at me when I was watching the film. I could never understand what the motivation of that character was meant to be, apart from the fact that the film needed a villain, that they needed someone for Tony to fight. Um, but there is a way with two very simple changes to dialogue that you can actually make the film as it is make absolute sense and give Obadiah a reason to get rid of Tony. And the first is in the scene in the Humvee where Tony is being asked about the models he has slept with. Obviously, to establish the fact that Tony's a bit of a ladies' man, a Lothario who can't commit to a relationship. Instead of saying that these were Sports Illustrated models or whichever magazine it is that they're referring to, instead of saying that, if the soldiers had been gossiping about the fact that Tony had slept with a very important senator's daughter. Then suddenly we can create an entire context that fits not just this film, but also Iron Man 2. And what I mean by this is Stark Industries is a major weapons manufacturer. They have deals with the Department of Defense, with the Pentagon. They're selling to the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines. If Tony had slept with the daughter of the senator in charge of military spending and procurement at the Pentagon, the senator in charge of that budget, suddenly his playboy actions, which until now Obadiah had tolerated because, well, it's just Tony, are putting the entire company in jeopardy. Because if that senator hates Tony, then that senator might not buy weapons from Stark Industries anymore. You know, that one change in dialogue about who Tony has slept with suddenly gives you a motivation of why Stark Technologies might be in jeopardy. And the business-minded CEO that Obadiah Stane is, that is the thing that is going to prey on him, because that is threatening his income, that is threatening his lifestyle, that is threatening everything he built up with Hard Stark. He built up this company. This company was built by him. Hard was an inventor. Tony's an inventor. But Obadiah was the one that built the company. And Tony, with his lifestyle, is suddenly messing with Obadiah's legacy. And that is a threat to Obadiah. That gives you motivation for that character to want to get rid of Tony. But let's ask ourselves, is there any indication that Obadiah is a megalomaniac or some sort of sociopath who would just kill anyone in his way? You go, no, he's a cutthroat businessman, he's a CEO, but you're not given any indication that he's evil or that he just enjoys inflicting pain and killing people. So, how can we put him in a position where suddenly he has to be the villain to try and kill Tony? Well, what if when Pepper finds that video footage, instead of that video footage being a direct communication with Obadiah Stane about, we kidnapped him just like you wanted us to, why not have it be a genuine ransom demand? That these terrorists had attacked the convoy, found this VIP guest, found out it was Tony Stark, and contacted Obadiah Stane. Stane at this point is dealing with the fact that Tony has just annoyed the Appropriations Committee or the Senator or the people in charge of procurement. He's just found this out. He's angry at Tony. Tony is threatening the company. And now suddenly Tony's been kidnapped. And no one would blame him if Tony died, because they all think Tony's already dead. No one needs to know if he refuses the ransom. So that video footage that the film takes time to show us, change the dialogue in that ever so slightly to, we have captured Tony Stark, give us this money, and have Obadiah either on video or just the sound of his voice saying, no, you can keep him. There you go. One additional line. And suddenly there's the motivation for Obadiah's getting rid of a problem. And he's not even getting his hands dirty. It has nothing to do with him. No one's going to blame him. And then when Pepper finds this out, that's when Obadiah is now backed into a corner. Tony has found out that they're selling weapons illegally and is going to go public about it. Pepper has found out that he knew about the kidnapping and he refused to have Tony released. He needs to kill Pepper and Tony. You have the motivation put in place. Is it still a little incredible? Yes, but it's a superhero movie. But those two changes the dialogue. Like, we're not even talking reshooting scenes. We're not talking adding in new scenes. We're not talking reworking the entire script. Two additional lines of dialogue. And we actually create a competent, coherent, and cohesive backstory for Obadiah. we give him a reason for why he wants to kill Tony, and we make it all at least semi believable. So that's when I talk about plot and character and how these things intertwine. This is the sort of the thing that I focus on when I'm editing work for authors, or when I'm even just watching narrative, that there's a consistency to approach. So I hope you've enjoyed that little look at analysis of how these things work, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks.